Welcome to the Still Life Podcast, a series of 21 topics, with each episode exploring the practical nature of the spiritual experience, with time-tested insights from psychotherapy, evolutionary biology, and meditation from ex-animator and stillness coach, Jim.
Because I view Jim George as a trainer for the soul. There's no better animation artist, drawer than Jim.
He is a friend, he is a mentor, incredible advisor. There's no one who's more important to me in my life.
The most interesting, most intelligent person I've ever met.
He truly is somebody who wants nothing from you and everything for you.
My name is Henry, and I'm a former client of Jim's, and the work we've done together over the past 8 years has changed my life. We're now on a mission to share these insights with you, and to draw some pretty interesting conclusions on how to live a still life. Well, good morning, Jim.
Good morning, Henry.
How you doing?
I'm doing better than I've got any right to expect. Luckiest guy on earth, and like I say, all the better for being here with you. I enjoy this time together.
I do too. It's a hell of a lot of fun, and what I've come to enjoy a lot more is playing around with the footage afterwards and realizing just how much I miss of what you say.
I miss much of what I say.
Yeah, well, it's a great
Sorry
feeling being like, there's no way he said that. And then I'm like, well, I'm definitely in the room and I'm probably not paying attention.
That's very funny. Well, I hope that somehow works out for the best.
Yeah, well, what I've started to do is I've actually transcribed a lot of your notes. I put them in my words and just put all of the key points into a flashcarding service. And so when I walk around now, I'm just looking on my phone, but I'm getting basically randomly cued with different aspects of old podcasts. And it really helps to deepen the knowledge and then see how woven it's all together.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons I'm so glad we're doing this. Because with each subsequent podcast, we're building on what has come before until finally there's a huge interconnected network of information. That's what I love about this kind of work. And we keep exploring. It keeps growing. That's the point. It's an ongoing discussion. It'll never end.
Yeah, and that's what I love about this, is that you've not sort of put a finite bound around what it is that we're discussing and how it is that you're meant to understand it.
Yeah.
It's so open and free to really evolve in whatever direction it needs to. And that evolution isn't, I love the analogy that you use of, you see a bird flying around, and if you shoot the bird, you pin it down.
Right.
Well, actually, I think you used the butterfly. The bird analogy was something else.
Well,
but,
no, that works too. They do the same thing.
But I'm still crossing wires. Anyway, when you kill the thing and you put it and you start to examine it in all of its sort of component parts, it's not what that thing is when it was alive.
Right.
And I think that what you've done here in terms of the way that you always sort of set up the frame for these podcasts is it's not my opinion.
Yeah.
It's just a discussion and a discourse.
Thank you.
I think that leaves it far more open for people to get involved and to take it in different directions and apply it to themselves.
Yeah.
And it isn't, this really rigid and sort of dead aspect.
Right. Or that I'm some authority. Because I'm not. I'm just another guy who's working just as hard as anybody else to try to figure stuff out. We're in this together. And the way you've set this up allows for that. And I want to thank you for that. Because these kinds of discussions, and today's no exception, require a huge amount of information because these are big questions. You can't just answer them in a little soundbite. So thanks for your patience as I try to ramble my way to making something remotely clear.
Well, I think that the topic today is really damn intriguing because it's so counterintuitive.
Isn't it?
And it's staring in the face of a lot of evidence that goes against what we believe to be true.
Yeah.
And
good for you.
I don't want to sort of take your punchline or jump to any conclusions too prematurely. But today we're talking about free will. And really the operative word there, I think, is free, because that implies that we have real autonomy over what we choose to find important.
Right.
So I think that that's a nice layup for myself to ask you, Jim, what is free will, and do you think we have it?
Well, first of all, thanks for even asking that question, because as you sort of imply, free will, at least the sense of free will, is so pervasive that very few of us even ask that question. What is it? We just go about, as we imagine, freely deciding to do stuff and then doing stuff. So thank you. And I'd like to begin and just start with the way I like to think of it. This is just how I navigate, and I've had a lot of help because there are some remarkable minds out there working on this issue right now. Sam Harris, who introduced me to at least the neurological piece of free will, I'd been working on it for decades philosophically, but Sam Harris brought in this piece of neuroscience work that really helped me understand free will at a deeper level. So I'd like to shout out to him. And then another just giant treasure of a human being, Robert Sapolsky, who's written a fairly recent book called Determined. Again, really exploring this stuff. I highly encourage people to read this stuff if you want to get down in deeper than we can possibly go today, because they really do a great job of it. On the other side of their discussion, another great mind, Daniel Dennett, has written a lot of articles, books. I won't go into who's on what side, but there's a lot of really valuable information out there. So with all of their help, I'd like to start by just saying I like to think of free will in terms of three sort of key elements, and you touched on one of them. The first one, what's known as agency. That is the ability, the capacity to control what we think and what we do, and to do so consciously, independently, autonomously, as you put it. Okay? That is, without some coercive outside influence. Okay? To think and to act consciously, that is, deliberately, we're deliberating, independently, with intent. Okay? There's our first piece. So the second piece we'll just call options. And here's the key part of this piece. At the time of the behavior, whatever it is, are there additional viable alternatives to that behavior available to us? Okay? If you only have one option, do you have a choice?
No.
Okay. If you have two options, do you have a choice?
Yes, but that depends on some factors.
Good for you. Good for you, because I can hold a gun to your head and I can say, Henry, either give me all of your money right now or I'm going to shoot you. You've got two options. Do you really have a choice?
No.
They're not viable options, are they?
No.
One may be more viable and you may be inclined to choose one over the other, but you can't say, waiter, my menu's messed up. There's nothing on here that I want. So that's crucial. Okay? Then the third piece, what we'll call veto power. The ability to not do something that you don't want to do. And that's sort of the negative aspect of free will. What Robert Sapolsky charmingly refers to as free won't, which I think he got from an old obscure stage production of Mary Poppins of all places. You got to love this guy because this guy's all over in his interest. So the ability to not do something we don't want to do. And that includes the ability to not do something that you've intended to do and are in the process of actually starting to do. Again, at the time of that behavior, do you have the ability to veto that? Say, no, on second thought, I'm not going to do that. Consciously, deliberately, and independently. And this gets into some tricky territory, some very subtle territory, very complex territory, because the more you get into how we're wired, the more you just go, oh, wow, I never thought of that. Let me give you an example. How we're wired. Given that you and I have set some kind of intention to be here, to have this podcast, to do what we're doing, and that's what we're going to continue to do, talk with one another. We're not going to leave, okay? Try not to hear this annoying sound. Try not to hear it and do what you're trying to do. I'd like to suggest you have no control over that, neurologically speaking. Now, you can do things to try and mediate it. Now, even more subtly, when we climb into the sort of neuro-linguistic piece, try not to think of a blue elephant. Because in order to syntactically and neurologically decode that sentence and understand it, you have to think of a blue elephant and then kind of mentally put a red X through it after the fact. Negate what you've already done. So you see how tricky it gets when we talk about this veto power thing. Okay? So I'm sorry for kind of going on too long about this, but these are the elements that I like to consider when we're talking about free will. Okay, does that help sort of, as you say, set the play space?
Yes, I think so. So just to summarize, those three elements of free will that you mentioned are agency, options, and veto power.
Yes.
When we talk about agency, that's the ability to control what we think or do consciously and deliberately.
Yes.
When we think of options, that is like at a certain time, I have a choice of behaviors. And you mentioned the gun to your head type. That's not really an option, even though you have two choices.
Good.
But you want to have like weightable options that are actually options.
Viable.
Great.
Good.
And then the third component you mentioned is veto power, the ability to say or stop intentionally doing something while in the process of already doing it.
Sure.
So those are the three
Brilliant
pieces that construct free will. Now, I think my follow-up question here is, do we actually have those three at any point in time?
So here's where I'm going to ask your indulgence, because in order to answer this question, that's one of the big questions of humanity. So I can say no and be done with it, but I have to sort of climb into this thing because there's a huge debate going on right now as we speak. And understand that debate's been going on for millennia, but now we have some very powerful, especially neurological evidence, data that we never had before as a species to help us understand it even more. But before we get into this debate part, I'd like to suggest that if you want to explore free will, just on your own, independently, without doing a lot of research, just begin by taking a few minutes and just quiet your mind, okay? Just stop all the persistent thoughts going on in your mind. Stop the words in your mind completely. Okay? And if this is the first time you've done that, or the 21st time you've done that, realize that you can't. Like, there's always going to be some thought in there. Okay? And I'd like to suggest you don't have any control over that, at least at that stage. So as you realize that, you realize too that almost all forms of meditation, especially those that have any legs at all, have one primary purpose, and that is to just get quiet enough to observe that. Observe your mind, because the harder you try to think your way to a still mind, the more difficult it's going to become. It's like your mind has a mind of its own. Thinking your way to a still mind, okay, like drinking your way to sobriety. You're kind of going in the wrong direction. So as you get quiet enough, some things begin to evolve. They occur to you. This is the beauty of it. And one of those things is, it's like I'm not my mind. I'm trying to do something and my mind is not cooperating. So what does that mean about who I am and what my mind is? You keep getting quiet, and that's the first part of your exploration. The second part, if you want to continue to explore free will, just take any behavior that you've engaged in and simply ask the question, why? Why did I do what I did? And if you're quiet enough, you don't have an agenda, you're just observing, you'll begin to discover what they call proximal causes of that behavior. By proximal cause, we mean the closest in time to the actual behavior, closest cause to the behavior. So an answer, why did I do something, might be something as wacky and general as, well, because I felt like it. And then if you're quiet, you'll realize, yeah, but there was something before that. Why did I feel like it? Well, because I wanted something or I didn't want something? Ah, okay. There's a prior cause. Then you just get quiet and you say, well, why did I want something? Why did I not want something? Well, because, and you start going back farther and farther and farther into what we call more distal causes, more distant from the behavior. And this is where the debate part starts coming in, because those causes just keep going back. There's an almost infinite regression of what we'll call causation, and not only do they go back more and more distally in time, they spread out in what Sapolsky refers to as distributive causality. They're coming at us from all directions. None of those causes do we have any conscious control over. And we want to start this answer to the question, do we have free will? Is it an illusion? With the most proximal causes we can find. The causes that are occurring in fractions of a second prior to the behavior. So we go right into neuroscience. What's happening neurologically? And the modern debate over this starts in 1983 with an experiment conducted by an American neuroscientist named Benjamin Libet. He's out of the University of California, San Francisco. He designed a brilliant experiment. He sat subjects down at a table with two objects on the table. First object, a button that they can press whenever they want to. Second object, a clock that's easy to read, and it measures tiny fractions of seconds. And it's an elegantly simple experiment, he says. Whenever you choose to, no pressure from me or anyone else, well, just press that button. And when you've consciously decided to press the button, just notice what time it is. Pretty simple. So then he hooks them up to what's called an electroencephalograph, an EEG. Bunch of electrodes all over their skull measuring what's called brainwave frequencies, kind of a metric for brainwave activity. And there are all kinds of electrodes measuring all kinds of different regions of the brain. And he sets up a sensor on the finger to determine exactly when the first tiny muscular movement occurs. And he's watching all this in real time. Okay? Then, off they go to the races. He repeats this experiment again and again and again. Not surprisingly, the subjects intended to press that button on average 200 milliseconds prior to actually pressing the button. That's not surprising. If that were the extent of the experiment, we'd probably have forgotten about it. However, 300 milliseconds, that's 0.3 of a second, prior to their conscious intention, a region of the brain called the supplementary motor area, the SMA as it's known, the area that is sending the signal to the finger, okay, lights up in what's called a readiness potential. And that's one of those, whoa, wait a minute moments. So just to be clear, 0.3 of a second before they intended to press the button, something already decided to press that button. So this sets the neuroscience community on its ear. It's like, whoa, all kinds of headlines coming out, free will. But neuroscience being neuroscience, a bunch of neuroscientists set about trying to replicate that experiment. Try to validate it or disprove it. And they did again and again and again. Countless neuroscientists, countless times, every time. It's validated. This goes on for decades until they have actually been able to trace this causal chain that we're talking about, neurologically speaking. And let me just simplify it because it's really complex so you understand what's going on here because it's very important. Turns out the prefrontal cortex, the sort of executive decision-making part of the brain, decides it's going to press the button. That's your decision. You're deciding to press the button. That prefrontal cortex then communicates neurologically with the rest of the frontal cortex. And that frontal cortex communicates to what's called the premotor cortex, getting things ready for the muscles of the finger to do what they're going to do. That premotor cortex then communicates neurologically to the supplementary, our old friend, supplementary motor area, and it acts as a gateway to the muscles themselves. So 25 years later, another experiment, basically the same thing, but with some interesting twists. Now they're not just using an electroencephalograph. This is 25 years later. They're using an fMRI machine, functional magnetic resonance imaging. They're watching the brain in real time as this experiment is being conducted. And sure enough, that supplementary motor area, 300 milliseconds, 0.3 of a second, prior to the subject's conscious decision to do so, decides to press that button. But here's the part that to this day leaves me just gobsmacked. I'm still scratching my head over this one. That prefrontal cortex, the executive deciding part of your brain, decides to press that button as much as 10 seconds prior to the conscious intention. 10 seconds before you decide to do something, something in your brain already decided. That one blows me away. Then they start doing more and more research. I would love to go into it. We don't have time, but I'd love to discuss it with you, because there's all kinds of experimental research done with different parts of the brain causing you to do things, and you think you haven't done them, causing you to think you've done something, okay, but you haven't done them, just by stimulating different parts of the brain, okay? We haven't even gotten into the more distal causes, okay? This requires other branches of science to come in. What caused that prefrontal cortex to decide to press that button? What kind of neuro and biochemical soup was it floating in at the time? You have no control over these things. What caused that? Well, how's your blood sugar doing? Are you taking meds? Did you have a cup of coffee this morning? Did you not have a cup of coffee? Did you have an argument with your significant other? Did you just lose your job? Did you just fall in love? What caused those things? And we keep going back more and more and more distally until we're talking about how were you raised? What was the environment like when you were being raised as a child and early adolescent? Because your frontal cortex isn't developed yet until the end of your adolescence. Why? Because we've evolved to let that cortex stay open and malleable and learn from the experiences that you're having as an individual. It's shaping that cortex and how it works, how it makes decisions. That means no one has the same experiences, no one has the same cortex as you or anyone else. And we keep going back farther than that. How about the fetal life? When the rest of your brain was developing, what was it like in that amniotic sac that you were floating around in for 9 months? Because that was the soup that developed your neurology. What were the circumstances like for your mother at that time? Was she a happy-go-lucky, happy camper? Was she miserable? Was she under stress? Did she not even want to be a mother? Because all that is going into you. You have no control over any of it. And we keep going back. What's the culture you're born into? Are people dropping bombs on you, or are they dropping compliments on you? Because that is changing your neurology. You've got no control over any of that. And we go back even further. Genetically, what are the genetic predispositions that are coming down through the generations to you? And what we realize is, to a large extent, all of this is some kind of weird lottery. Our whole idea of decision-making, of morality, as Sam Harris puts it beautifully, is an awful lot of luck. And we have no control over that luck. At least not consciously and not independently. Okay? So I could go on, and I'm not going to. I want to thank you for your patience. But this is really important to get all this out there. And there's so much more I wish we could talk about. I hope I haven't left too much out, and I hope I haven't just glazed you over.
I don't think you've left too much out.
Okay.
I definitely
Right.
think that you've erred on the side of thoroughness here.
Okay, good.
So I think just to, again, summarize this is when questioning whether we have free will or not, a really good and fertile place to look is right into neuroscience, because that is the closest information measurable to us that we have that is indicative of a decision that we may be making.
Yes.
So that is proximate when we say close. So let's look at the proximate causes. We look at the neuroscience. In 1983, a guy called Libet conducted a great experiment where basically he showed that neurologically, you have made a decision before you make a decision. And that's been cited and iterated upon and replicated and really built upon. So there's this mound of evidence in the scientific community that's saying, well, actually, your brain's made up the decision before your conscious mind actually has access to that decision having been made.
Yes.
And then your conscious mind has a feeling that it's made that decision, but really that feeling could have been prompted, promoted, and supported by all of these proximate causes.
Yes.
Then when looking more distance, when taking more distance from the proximate causes, when looking and basically expanding the scope of context, we realize that we don't have control over genetics, we don't have control over where we're born, how we're raised, who we're born to, why we have the neurology that we do. All of these things are influencing how we are making decisions in real time.
Yes.
All of these things are completely out of our control and far more dependent upon luck.
Yes.
And that is a pretty distasteful conclusion to come from, because I feel as if I have an ability to make these decisions.
Yes.
When really then looking at it and being like, well, I don't have that. What does that mean for me?
Yeah.
So I think that actually leads to my next question, where if it is an illusion, if free will is an illusion and I don't necessarily have it, do I make any of these decisions myself? Is this, I think the reflexive sort of answer that I've come to in the past is, well, if I don't have free will, why do anything? You know, why act morally if it's already predisposed? You know, do I just sort of sit back and enjoy the show? It takes a lot of my feeling of control, my feeling of agency, of autonomy, of independence, of being me, like all of these big aspects of my existence, and just pulls the rug away.
Yes.
So I think in a more concise way, if I were to hold the belief of not having free will, because that's a big shift in a belief,
It is.
how do I then still act morally and act well in the world and feel as if I'm contributing to living a good life for myself?
Well, that's a lot of data that you've thrown at me in the form of a question, because each one of those pieces is a huge answer.
You can condense
So I'm
too,
going to try
just discard
to,
stuff
I'm
if
gonna
you
try
don't want
try
to.
to pick. First of all, at the most practical level, why would we want to believe that we have free will? Why is that so natural to us? And I'd like to suggest the simplest, most practical answer is just pure evolutionary practicality. And we've got to start with the idea that evolution doesn't give a whit about what's true. Evolution doesn't care at all about what's real. It cares about one thing and one thing only: survival at the biological level long enough to pass your genes on to the next generation. So remember that. By definition, that's what evolution is. It's selecting for biological survival. So I'd like to suggest that if any of our early ancestors out on the Serengeti Plain someplace were sitting around discussing and trying to figure out whether they've got free will actually or not, they were probably eaten. And that probably delayed the debate for some millennia. But having the sense of free will and therefore being able to act in a more pragmatic way doesn't mean we have free will. It just means that at that stage in our evolution, and here's the key piece, served us. It served an evolutionary purpose. I'm suggesting we're at a very different point in our evolution now, and I believe that we're ready, I hope we're ready, to deal with this other set of facts, evidence, and adjust, because evolution doesn't stop with us. We're still evolving, we're still growing.
Can I pause you for a second?
Sure.
So you mentioned that this illusion of free will must have served us, and we're going back and you're basically looking at more ultimate causes, going into more distance and looking at the tribal landscape in which we evolved.
Yes.
And so if we have an illusion of free will, then to me, I'm thinking I go right back to status, to cooperation, and to basically like keeping the tribe together.
Exactly.
And so if we have this sense of free will, it gives an ability to then, it supports reputation. Because if you don't have free will, then the other people around you don't have reputation. It's like, oh, they, it's not their fault.
That's right.
You know, there's no blame. There's no ability to basically change and morph the tribe to become more fit at the group level.
How do you control the group? You see the purpose it serves. You've got free will. You do what we want you to do. What the group has decided is important, you're good. If you don't, you're bad. And if necessary, throw you out of the tribe or lop off your head. It's pretty simple, because the rest of it's so complex, we're too busy trying to survive. We don't want to get parsed too far down. It's simple. Okay, thank God. Here's how we move forward.
Okay, so let's make this a little bit more real, because I'm getting the chills, because like the epiphanies are just coming, right?
Sure.
So say we're in a tribe 14,000 years ago, pre-agricultural revolution. We're walking around the Serengeti plain, and there's somebody in our tribe that does something that is disdainful, right? Let's say they leak information to another tribe that means that other tribe knows when the best time to raid us would be.
Yes.
And so we think to ourselves, okay, this guy has free will. He has the ability to make the choice, and he made a choice that was against our best interests.
Yes.
Let's kill the guy, get him out of the tribe, like just not even kill him, just leave him, right? Just exclude him.
That's a death sentence.
Death sentence, absolutely.
Good.
But then we don't get our hands dirty, right? Because somebody else doesn't.
And speaking of getting your hands dirty, who's going to do the killing, or who's going to make the decision to kill the person by throwing them out of the tribe? What has to happen emotionally for you to make that decision?
Oh, a lot. You know, there has to be some very sort of strong emotions.
Yes,
to then,
like what?
Like anger, frustration, fear, all of this stuff.
Even hatred, because they have literally threatened your life. Do you feel the same hatred for a branch that fell out of a tree? Do you feel the same hatred for a bunch of birds that took off and gave your position away to the other tribe? Do you hate them?
No.
Are you going to kill them all? It's like, damn, that was an unfortunate incident. We've got to deal with it. But they didn't intend to do that. Do you feel the same way about that same person in the tribe that leaked the information if you find out that they had some brain damage in the last raid and somebody belted them right in this area that makes it so they can't decide? They don't have that region of the brain functioning anymore. Do you still hate them?
it would be more difficult to unstick from the emotions, but that would be a crowbar. It would be really helpful
Exactly.
in terms of that information.
And is that going to serve you 14,000 years ago when all you're trying to do is survive?
No, absolutely not.
Good. That's where we were. This is where we are now. And that's the key. That's why I think this discussion is so important. Very few people go here with discussion of free will.
Great. Well, this has left me with a lot of clarity because I think that there is such a useful tool of using evolutionary psychology and looking at the more ultimate causes to understanding why something may be there and why this illusion of free will is so important because when pruning and shaping tribe, it makes it so much easier to make decisions.
Doesn't it?
We're not making decisions as such, but like a tribe with free will, and well, a tribe that believed that it had free will and a tribe that believed that it didn't.
Yes.
The tribe that believed that it didn't would just sort of be like
What do we do?
pontificating and
Yes.
philosophizing.
What do we do about this?
Yeah.
I don't know.
And they'll be dead.
Yeah.
They'll be dead. But
Kevin can keep doing what he's doing. He can't help it. Zoot, in comes an arrow and you're done.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so that really helps me to understand the strength of the illusion.
Yeah.
Because there's such a huge evolutionary pressure
Yeah.
to uphold it.
Yes.
And that's why today, when born in this human body, I get all of this sort of default beliefs.
Yes.
One of them being that I have that agency and that control.
Yes.
Although it's really probably, well, it's not the case if we look
That's
at the
right.
evidence, but I even have a hard time admitting that because of how much I feel as if I'm actually choosing the words that are coming out of my mouth.
Yeah. Well, I'm telling you that a lot of people, even neuroscientists, faced with this information, are still desperately trying to parse their way around those implications because it does fly in the face of what's become an epigenetic characteristic. Of course we've got free will. I felt it. And you see where this goes. Hopefully by the end of our podcast, we'll see why it can be a good thing. But that's a whole other discussion.
Well, I interrupted you, and the question that I had asked you before is how do we continue to act morally if we don't have free will?
Okay? And you were describing my sense of autonomy, your words, my feeling of status in the group, my. I'm asking you, how are you defining yourself? How are you constraining who you really are by how you choose to think of who you are? Because if you want to act morally, you have a choice. A choice occurs to you, more accurately. You can either continue to try to operate like all of these post-arboreal hominids fresh out of the trees who were believing that they're separate, isolated, apart from, and not a part of the universe. They're acting independently of that universe. Okay? You can continue operating like that, and if you don't have free will, holy crap, that's a blow to that ego. I'm saying that what this research does is gives us a golden opportunity to realize something that's precious. You are more than just that egoic narrative. You are a part of something huge, infinite. You are not acting independent of it. You are acting a very much part of that, not apart from it. The universe itself. And I'm suggesting that if you will allow that sense of self to expand, pretty soon that sense of self is going to begin to include other people. We've talked about this. Practical spirituality is nothing more than living your life best you can and expanding that sense of self. As that sense of self begins to expand, it includes someone else, and then more and more someone else. And at that point, the idea of harming someone else makes no sense to you because you're harming yourself. It's like poking yourself in the eye with a pencil. It just doesn't make any sense at all to harm someone else, a fellow human being. So in the process of this expansion, you realize, wow, the more I expand my sense of self, the less I require all of these external laws, morals, rules, extrinsic values. I'm behaving in an ethical way, a moral way, a legal way. For the most part. Now, some cultures make wacky things legal or illegal. I'm not talking about that. You said, how do you behave if you don't have free will? Remember, independent free will, independent of the rest of the universe, acting through you. Does that get too esoteric for you, or does that
I
make
think
sense?
that what I would have struggled with, especially 5 years ago, is having the experiential data personally of what it feels like to be larger than the constricted version of just myself.
Yes.
And so what I would like to do is firstly just summarize what you said, make sure that I caught it all.
Good,
And then
good.
secondly, go into, let's talk about practical spirituality, but bring it to a even more practical place in terms of like, what are techniques and ways that you get into that space where your sense of self is expanded so much so that you feel as if like, I should throw this trash away. I need to do X, Y, and Z. So actually, I'll go into summarizing it before garbling a question together and mixing everything up and just confusing everybody that's listening. So just in summary here, I asked you, how do you behave morally if you don't have a sense of free will? And that is like, well, let's redefine you.
Good.
Because
and remember, I don't want to cut you off, but remember, free will meaning I am independent of the universe. I'm acting autonomously and I'm doing it consciously. Because I've still got a subconscious mind that's doing clearly what it's doing. So go ahead, just to be clear.
yeah, and I think that that's actually helps to really underscore another illusion that is absolutely default and pre-programmed into us, which is I am separate.
Yes.
Which actually you take 2 seconds and a couple of thought experiments and you're like, how could I, like, I'm not separate.
Good
All I
for
got to
you.
do is hold my breath and realize I'm in a constant exchange
Good for
with
you.
this universe around
for
us.
you.
So when really questioning the sense of self and how much a part of something larger it is,
Yes.
or how distant that is and independent,
Yes.
it's like, well, actually, let's drill right in there.
Good.
Because that is what will help us find a more wholesome answer. Because if you redefine what you are,
Yes.
expand your sense of self so that that gets larger and encompasses more and more people, more and
Yes.
more things, more and more whatever around us.
Yes.
It's a sense of oneness, a sense of wholeness. And from that place, even if you don't have free will, you're not acting to just benefit and advantage one sort of tiny little fragment of this universe.
Yes.
It's more so you've just got an instinctive, reflexive set of behaviors that
Yes.
just then come when changing the first principle, where it's like, I'm not this lonely, scared, afraid
Brilliant.
human.
And all good things derive from that shift. An endless cascade of good and better and better and better things evolve from that shift right there.
Yeah, I
That's
mean-
all stillness is about.
You can look at all of the religions, and the through line through lots of them is the golden rule. You know, do unto others what you would want done unto you. And that right there is self-evident when you expand the sense of self.
Yes.
Where it's, you were mentioning like, why would I want to, you know, I don't think it was hit myself in the head with a hammer, but it was something like that.
Sure.
And so I think that this still sounds great in theory, right? What if I have difficulty expanding my sense of self, and how do I expand my sense of self so that I can feel that more automatically, more reflexively?
Good. So just notice. Don't change anything. Notice your sense of self right now. Just notice it. Don't do anything to change it. Notice what it feels like.
It's like the blue elephant, though. I've already started to...
Okay, but what I'm saying is you're changing it. You're not noticing or trying not to notice. Notice what it feels like. Notice the tension in the body. Notice
Even just noticing it, like that in itself is an expansion.
you're answering your own question. That's what's so beautiful here. If you get quiet, if you get still, and it's very helpful to have techniques that will help mediate some of these external and internal obstacles to getting still. That's all our still life techniques are. They're not a be-all, end-all. They're helping to get to this process of being quiet enough to realize, and hear me, you are already still and utterly expanded. This contraction into an egoic self, a myopic, tiny little person who's terrified, separate and alone against the universe, is an illusion. We can get into why that illusion is there, but it is an illusion. All you have to do is let that go. Get quiet enough to just let go. You breathe in slowly, belly only. That's drawing the breath down into the lungs. Then you let that breath go very slowly. And as you let that breath go, you relax your body. Just relax. It'll drop a little bit. Breathe in again, belly only. Breathe out. Relax that body even more. Let even more go. Breathe in again. Breathe out. And as you do, let any tension in the gut, any tightness in the chest, let it go. You're right here, right now. And as you keep doing this, your sense of self is expanding. It can't help it. It's already there. And I'm suggesting that that is something we simply don't do normally during the day. Our body's trying to do it, but we're too distracted. We've been too distracted from the beginning. I'm suggesting that we have hit a different point in our evolution. We are no longer just trying to survive as egoic tribesmen. We are not just going to survive, we're either going to thrive or we are going to go extinct. The way we're behaving now is pointing in a direction that makes that quite clear. This is a golden opportunity for us to evolve, to thrive. Literally thrive.
I want to build a really tight bridge to the man/boy I was 8 years ago. And I say tight in the sense where I like firm stories that I feel as if I'm not falling, right?
Sure.
And so when building
Good
a
for you.
metaphorical bridge,
Good for
I
you.
don't want to fall.
Good.
And I think that something that I would like to mention to him was that when you first started talking about my sense of self is expanding, and I have this feeling like, why would I want to hurt myself type thing? My intuitive sensation that I projected onto that was then, oh, well, I must be able to feel the pain of the cat that I'm looking at that's running in the alley, right? Because my sense of self is expanded, and like I must feel that pain viscerally within myself. Well, like what I would want to say to him is that doesn't make any sense, because you're not going to have the neurobiology of the cat there. However, there's this very subtle sensation that you were talking about as we were getting still. And it is an expansion. It absolutely is this sort of letting go.
Yes.
And through that, there just becomes more of a, again, it's very subtle, but there are these gut intuitions where it doesn't feel right. It feels off.
Yes.
And that to me is how I now have recodified what you have said in terms of my sense of self has expanded, and I wouldn't want to hurt myself, because especially over the past 5 years when I've been far more intense, and intense is the wrong word because it's kind of oxymoronic, intense stillness, but like just far more deliberate and disciplined around my stillness practice, I've seen that a lot more, where it's like, even if nobody's looking, there's this aspect where it's like, I want to just be airtight with myself in terms of acting in a way that is whole and one with whatever it is around. If I'm on a hike, I pick up the trash. You know, it's like, and if I'm on a hike by myself at sunrise.
Yes.
And it's like, it's not going to get the pat on the back.
Yes.
But that, to me, is that subtle sensation of when you get more and more quiet, the less of these sort of billboard type decisions of, you need to do this to protect this, and this is why you're scared, and all of this stuff.
Yes.
It's far more just obvious to move in a different direction per se. And then you were mentioning that we as a culture don't do this all of the time, and I think this falls really well into our distraction conversation, because we've been so perpetually distracted that there's so many influences that are pulling our attention away from the subtle sense. It is very subtle. Anyway, I just wanted to take that sort of detour there, because I know if I was listening to this, I'll be like, okay, great, you're having an expanded sense of self. How do I get that?
Good. Well, remember that what you were saying as that 8-year ago version was, I'm having trouble feeling that in my egoic, separate self, my body. And as you get quiet, and that's the key, if you're not getting quiet, if you're not quieting your mind, calming your emotions, relaxing your body, that's not going to change. If you will do this on a regular basis, you'll realize that those sensations in your body are starting to really, really quiet down. And you're beginning to perceive something that you can't perceive with all that noise. That's that subtle thing you're talking about. That's an expanded sense of self, right out past your body. Right out past your body to someone else. And this idea that you don't have conscious, independent free will starts to help you remember that connection.
And when you're in that state, your neurochemistry is absolutely changing.
Oh my God,
and then
is it?
The options that are presented to you tend to be far more benign.
Yes.
And tend to be far more whole, which is a beautiful thing.
Yes.
Because I think that the more that you act in a way that is for the good of everything around you, rather than just for the good of your separate self, the more that you act in that way, over the long run, the more, like, it's a very long-term strategy to do such.
Yes.
And it's a really short-term strategy that is really helpful. Let's take this back to why it evolved in the first place. Really helpful 14,000 years ago to optimize for sense of individual self. When resources are scarce and when survival is a real question every day.
Physical survival, not emotional and egoic survival. Physical survival. Yes.
Yes.
Brilliant.
And what we did as a species is we went from physical survival and had all of this biochemistry that was optimizing for that. And then as soon as all of that risk kind of was mitigated by wiping out our predators and creating shelter and discovering antibiotics, all of that stuff, then we just took that from the physical realm right into the psychological realm and just mapped that, right? So instead of status being about, you know, actually physically who is the biggest and who is in charge, or who has the most sort of coercive control over the most amount of brute strength. It then gets decoupled, and it's like you see Edison and Tesla competing over status through prestige instead of through like physicality, because it's all just decoupled into the psychological realm instead of the physical realm. But like we can't tell the difference, which I think is kind of bloody cool.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Because what would happen if Tesla and Edison had cooperated? Because all of this stuff that Tesla was coming up with, because he clearly lost the competition, all of this research, this understanding, this knowing, these inventions that were just destroyed because of a very tribal, very competitive kind of control, didn't benefit the culture.
Yes, and I think that comes from, it would have been significantly helped had Thomas Edison expanded his sense of self to include more people, to include more of the world, because then it wouldn't have been nearly as exclusionary in terms of this man's coming up with a lot of stuff that's going to compete with a lot of stuff that I just came up with, and so let's kill all of that stuff in its tread so that we don't even have to worry about it in the future.
And I'll make my alliances with people with lots of money and lots of power to make that happen. And what I'm suggesting is that works at a certain point in our evolution. But I'm suggesting that evolution hasn't selected for our best qualities. It's selected for those that allow us to physically survive. Not to put too fine a point on it, but if we had the ability to spit venom, our ability to survive would be greatly enhanced. And so that would be our characteristic. We go around spitting venom. Evolution doesn't care how it does it. It's selecting for whatever it is at the end of the day, whatever damage is done, whatever potential greatness is destroyed when you kill another individual, ending their ability to pass their genes. That's all that matters. I'm suggesting that we, ironically, have gotten to a different point in our evolution. It's time to stop thinking like that. What has become the greatest threat to our survival? Us. Us. How are you going to compete with that? How are you going to kill us? And evolution is very, very slow, biologically, neurologically. The changing environment is very fast, very rapid. So we're cobbling together structures that have evolved over millennia to kind of work with changes. A lot of our morality is built around that. We've cobbled an awful lot of what we consider to be moral to our evolutionary sense of disgust with something that's rotten or poisonous, toxic to us. And very few people understand that, except for the neuroscientists who are in there saying, wow, this same region of the brain that lights up when you smell feces has lit up when you are getting ready to judge or condemn someone for a certain kind of behavior. What does that mean? Do you think we cared about that or knew about that 5,000 years ago? 10 years ago, when we were busy judging and condemning one another for whatever it is we were doing.
And I think that that's such an important point to really drive home, is that the biologists talk about the function of exaptation, where it's like you have one thing that then has like one feature of being alive that then can be used for something else.
Co-opted to something else.
For example, the tongue. You know, you see the tongue on a lot of animals. However, we've co-opted the tongue to be able to cooperate with our with our vocal cords to be able to reverberate hot air and transfer theory of mind. Now, that's an incredible evolutionary advantage, but we're just using the same pieces of stuff that we've already had and like making it and tweaking it and refining it so that we can then get some type of edge on the other species.
But it also makes us more inclined to choke than other animals, because that tongue has had to shift its position in the larynx in order to do that. There's a cost to all of this.
Exactly. And so when using your example, it's like, if I think it was the insula that gets provoked, that is, okay, yeah, this at first came from like this region was useful to help us to move away from things that were potentially
Rotten
harmful.
flesh.
Yeah,
anything
absolutely.
that's
They're like,
toxic.
that's not
Yes.
going to help me to
Good for you.
continue to live.
Good for you.
And then instead of actually like, evolution isn't going to sit back and be like, you know, the most elegant thing would be to create a whole new factory
Yes.
of neural tissue.
Let's evolve the Kumbaya song so that can be part of this process.
Yeah, exactly.
No, not how
It's
it
like,
works.
okay, let's just map this other stuff onto it because it kind of works.
Yes.
And it works pretty well.
Yes.
And you do that, and there's like all of this sort of like, I'm using a duct tape analogy, but at the same time, it's like actually the human mind is quite an exquisite
It's
piece
a
of tissue.
neurological wiki process.
What do you mean by wiki process?
Every one of these things is like coming onto the system and saying, yeah, let's add this piece and let's do this. Well, here's my contribution. It's like, okay, but it's kind of a hodgepodge. It's like most cities have evolved like that. You get these super planned communities. They don't look like London. You look at a map of London, you can see history in the way that thing's laid out. You can see the old city of London. It's this sort of organic little thing in the middle, and then there's all of a sudden this stuff spreading out into north and south and east and west. So it's a wiki process at work, but that's what evolution is, because it has to adapt.
And I again cut you off, and I want
want you to. This is good.
But I want you to really tie a knot in, okay, evolution is not optimizing for our happiness.
Nope.
And it's
Could
not
care less whether you're happy.
and it's not necessarily optimizing for a rosy, sunny world.
Or fulfillment, or a great relationship, or anything other than survive long enough to pass those genes. After that, I don't even care about you. You're on your own.
So if that's the case, you mentioned that we then have an opportunity to change the way that we think.
Yeah.
That might be an illusion in itself, because we might not necessarily actually have that opportunity is presenting itself to us. And I think the purpose of this podcast is to offer more proximate causes to potentially shifting the neurochemistry within yourself so that you're presented with more kind of benign opportunities.
Yes. Yeah.
But my question here is that right now, is it your belief that humanity is going off of the cliff? And what do you think people could do? Because it's going to take a lot of small effort all over the place.
Yes. Distributive causality.
Nice.
Yes.
I'm really glad that that was a nice sort of tie back in.
Yeah.
And it really the 8-year-old boy in me is just like, oh, that was a really good puzzle piece. That fit in really well, Jim. I just want to make sure that doesn't go unrecognized.
But note the correlation between that and wholeness, as opposed to 5 people acting independently with way too many resources to do what they are consciously, independently willing. because I'm suggesting that when you continue to operate and believe you have conscious, independent free will, you are acting out of the most severe myopia you can possibly engage. And that in so doing, the question is, are you optimizing for the best or the worst in what's happening? I don't mean to break it into some binary thing. That's not what I'm talking about. Why are we having let's just call it the situation with our climate right now? What is the situation with the climate, and what's the problem?
From a systematic perspective,
Yeah.
I think that it's the tragedy of the commons, where everybody has all of these different actors have knowledge of the resources that are available in terms of like oil. And there's this aspect of like, if I optimize for me and mine at the expense of everybody else, there's a marginal cost to doing so, but I have an increased utility, you know? And so if everybody has that thought, then it creates basically the common aspect, and the commons here is the world, gets ripped of its resources.
Yes.
And then because the resources that we're talking about in particular, primarily coal and then oil, have, when used in excess, such a destabilizing ability to change the ecosphere in terms of just the relative mixture of gases in the atmosphere, so that there's it changes the overall temperature, and that overall temperature shift then has an incredible amount of repercussive effects that have a big delay associated with them. And so we've got the data that we've fucked with it really hard, and that the delay's a couple of decades, but like we've done it really, really badly. And we can either continue to optimize for ourselves and like continue to drill for oil or continue to do whatever, because in the short term we get it's an increase in status if we reduce it to whatever that is, which can be important when thinking about, geopolitics. However, God, this is a really lengthy way of answering your question, which is to get back to the question, why is it that we have this problem in the first place? And I think if I were to reduce it even further without hopefully being reductionist, hopefully I provided just enough context. It comes from the identification with self being individual and separate and small.
Yes. And making the huge leap from just me to my group. Wow. How many millennia did that take? Okay? I'm suggesting it's that myopia, that egoic sense of self that comes with the existential terror of that ending. All of that leads to a series of just tragic choices. It leads to all our problems, including the degradation of the environment. How do you win that contest when you're killing the place you live? It doesn't matter. It's run amok. So I'm not saying we're going off a cliff here. That's a tough way to put it. I'm saying we have the potential to go off a cliff if we don't do something about that kind of thinking. You can't legislate that. What you have to do is demonstrate as clearly and as succinctly, as practically as you possibly can, the advantages of thinking differently. And that when that happens, when cooperation begins to supplant just brute competition, we have evolved as a species.
Okay, so I think that this is a great place to be self-serving for our group. Because to me, the advantages of thinking differently come from the advantages of feeling differently.
Yeah.
You know, and when we were talking about this earlier, where from a more sort of heady viewpoint,
Yes.
I would be like, well, show me how you expand your...
How do we do it?
Yeah, like show me how you expand your sense of self. Like give me the feeling that that's happening. And then I went back in to redefine what that feeling was, because I was having a more climactic expectation, where it's like, oh, I want this to feel like ecstatic, you know, that I'm probably because, you know, that guy has a lot of experience with psychedelics, and the expansive sense of self is also paired with an ecstasy.
What does ecstatic mean?
Outside of self.
Yes.
Yeah. So I love the etymology. I love how your mind works. But I think the advantages of thinking differently come from just having data of having felt differently.
Yes.
And I think that our society has a depth of stillness, a depth of this ability to quiet down and have that feeling. Hence what we were talking about in distraction, because, you know, our culture has just been driven in that direction. And I think that by having more and more data of what it feels like, and then the advantages of what it feels like, and having acted through that feeling, you know, it took me bloody years to understand truly, and I don't think I actually ever will understand, but like it took me years to get to a depth of feeling where I know that like negative states of mind, whether it be anxiety or fear of any kind, when I act through those lenses, and it's really self-serving. And I think that it makes the most sense, and it's so clear and so lucid, but like at the same time so bloody stupid in hindsight. When I act through those lenses, things don't work out so well. And it's like over time of having established this practice, I now realize that I got to do it for an hour in the morning. I got to top up for half an hour in the afternoon, and I'm doing it before I go to bed too. And then I'm doing it in little mini increments throughout the day.
Good for you.
Because it's like, these states of mind don't believe in each other. These states of mind don't also know their limitations, because again, they're just fusing neurology, but they're not like collecting the data, right? And if I understand that every time I've gotten still and acted from that place and looked backwards, I'm like, that was a much better way to do what I was doing. And I think that if the world has more of this in it, people have more of an ability to access that space within themselves that is more expanded, especially people that have so much leverage in terms of they're creating these artificial intelligences that can, is it artificial intelligences? Yeah, cool. That can have an extreme amount of power. If they wire that the wrong way, if they go more Edison and Tesla, and they take more of the Edison routes, where it's like, let's optimize, create the systems for my small group of sort of the plutocracy. There we go. Thank you. For my little plutocracy, and just optimize for this group at the expense of other things. It's like telling somebody that's running a hospital to like give all of your data also to, you know, the banks or whatever. It's like, no, we need to put in regulatory bounds to make sure that these things grow in a holistic way, rather than grow in a way that can absolutely just undercut ourselves in the future, because it's not gonna, it's just gonna be us. And I think that you're so spot on, where it's like, yeah, we've got this primitive neurology, but it's gotten to a place where we are our greatest risk for our own survival. And if we don't have the people that are the most resourced to actually access the areas of their mind that present them with the best decisions, not only selflessly, but selfishly too.
There you go.
Because you do get that feeling of meaning from all of this stuff, right? If we don't offer those types of resources, will just keep following this dumb path of people just hoarding as much resources that they can, and then building spaceships because they don't want to stay on the planet that's dying. It's like,
yes,
holy shit.
Yes.
Anyway, you can tell that I'm letting passion and state of mind really override clear thoughts.
So let's take this opportunity to do what you asked. How do we do it? Okay? You just stated that's the state you're in. Just breathe through the nose, belly only. Hold it. And now just let that breath go. This time very slowly. Slow exhale. Just let it just creep out. Just trickle out through the throat. That's it. One breath. What does it feel like now? One breath, mind you. We didn't even officially get still.
It's beautiful. I can feel this just progressive relaxation throughout my body.
Yes. Now that's because you've been practicing. I'm suggesting that this is cumulative and it's associative. Part of what we're doing is we're building techniques that get you in what I call a long form to a very deep state of stillness and peace. And then because our minds are associative, we can associate different kinds of anchors to that state where all you have to do is breathe. For the love of everything that's holy, Henry, you have to breathe anyway. We may as well make it count. So you'll realize, as I have, and this is luck. This wasn't free will on my part. That's why I'm so bound and determined to share it. I can't claim credit for this. I don't have free will in that sense. I get to take that breath constantly during the day. It's become a habit. I don't even have to think about it because something bigger than I am is allowing that to continue to happen, to remind me in spite of myself. As I get wrapped up, just as you did, and come back. Wow. Okay. And what I'm suggesting is, in terms of free will, the absence of free will doesn't have to change all these structures in our culture. People get terrified in a knee-jerk kind of way. Well, if there's no free will, well, what do we do? Nobody's responsible for anything. Sure they are. Sure they are. From a cultural standpoint, we have to protect the culture. If someone is doing something that is pathological to the culture, we must incentivize them to do the right thing in terms of the culture and disincentivize them to do the wrong thing in terms of the culture, whatever that is. If they continue to pathologically behave, we have to then, as a culture, and I'm sorry to put it this clearly, but this is what we do. We slowly begin to decrease the amount of freedom they have in that culture. That's all the penal system is. That's all the legal system is. It's a set of values in a hierarchy. The difference is we don't have to hate them or condemn them. They're doing the best they can. That doesn't mean we just turn them loose and say, keep doing pathological things, any more than we're going to get mad at those seagulls that just flew by that were making all that noise. Do you think they're doing that with free will to mess up our podcast? It's unfortunate. I'd like to do something about it. Maybe we can shoo them away. But we don't have to hate them. That's damaging to us. That's soul crushing to us. If we can understand that we don't have to do that, very little in our legal system has to change.
And I think what's really beautiful about what you just said is that if we stop believing that we have free will, we can allow other beliefs in that actually become self-evident. You know, we don't necessarily have to seek them out, because as we were talking earlier, the golden rule just becomes self-evident when you get quiet and expand your sense of self. So really the mechanism of getting quiet and expanding your sense of self is revealing what is
good for you,
moral, holistic,
good for you,
etc.
From the bottom up, from inside out, not from the top down.
And what I think is really beautiful is that this folds quite well into how, well, I think it's really beautiful because it's why I live the life that I do. Because when I get into that space, it makes Taoism make so much more sense, because there's just this, you feel like you're tapping into a deeper river, and you're like, oh, okay, I don't quite know why. I don't need to know why. I can let go of this control. But there's this just sort of tug of like where I need to be, what I need to be doing, how I need to be doing it. And with the intent, because I think that, again, when you quiet things down, the intent to want to contribute to something larger, again, just dusts itself off. It's like, as a reflex to that, I get this feeling of meaning. And that to me is really quite beautiful, because it's so simple. And as you always say, simple is not easy, but it's so simple, where it's like, quiet the stuff down, understand that there are a couple of illusions. You can understand those illusions by just studying from the inside out, studying mind, or just looking at and understanding humans and just life in general. But like self, sense of separate self, that's a convenient illusion. A sense of autonomy and that you have control, that's another convenient illusion.
Very useful.
Very useful. Convenient illusion. When you start to replace beliefs with things that are more, I think, accurate, more fit to what is actually there, it leaves you with an incredible feeling sense. And I've started to really understand now why, when reading about these sort of Hindu gurus, is like, you know, when disciples first come to them, they're like, everybody needs to have this. We need to push this down everybody's throats. You know, maybe if I get quiet enough, I could get in Donald Trump's head and I could change everything, you know, from a distance. The further you go along, the more you realize that this much larger thing is actually working, and you're more of just a puppet for it. And being able to drop that illusion at greater and greater degrees allows for what they call, with all the cities and the miracles and all of that stuff, brush that stuff aside, because the feeling sense that they're reporting and then helping, guiding people to get into is that samadhi. It's that oneness, that wholeness, that feeling, again, of having dropped this vessel and returning back to what it was that we were before we were born, and what it is that will be after we die type thing. And that right there is just, it's the spiritual freedom that I really do believe all of the prophets and all of the poets and the gurus to be pointing at. And it's so bloody simple. It just takes a lot of time because of how deeply hardwired all of this stuff is to our genetics. So I have no question there. I just went again on a hairy dog tail.
Sure.
Hopefully it was a prompt to something.
Well, the thing that's so useful about this is when we get down to it and we quiet the mind, you understand that being a part of something bigger, not having conscious, independent free will. Okay, remember that part of the descriptors. I'm suggesting, and Sapolsky does too, that doesn't mean you're not what's called a causal agent in this world. That doesn't mean that what you're deciding to do isn't important and that you do it isn't important. I'd like to suggest all the more, if you can drop the myopic limitations of a purely egoic sense of self, that this thing of the universe acting through you starts to really give more meaning to just about anything you're doing. It's very difficult to find meaning in egoic activities in the end. You'll get temporary sort of reprieves from the fear and existential angst. You'll get temporary pleasure. But ultimately, that meaning is very, very fugitive. It's not very deep. And it's gone quickly, so we're thrashing to try to find some more external thing that's going to give us meaning. You drop into these spaces and you realize the deepest meaning, remember from our meaning podcast, being part of something bigger than just that egoic self. That's what this is. It's that simple.
Okay, Jim, so I think my final question here, and this is one that's maybe something that I'll just have to sit with for longer.
Sure.
But is my decision to even get still in the morning, is that even my decision? You know, it just seems like it happens to me. And if that's the case, it might go back to the question that I was talking about before, where it's like, well, if I don't have control over my thoughts or anything, like, why should I even do anything that I know is good for my long-term self?
Sure.
Maybe I'm answering my own question. But like, is stillness itself, like, is this practice volitional? And do I have any control or any choice at all?
So first, let's take the second part, because that's an important lead into the question that you were asking about stillness. Do I have any control at all? This is where my sort of view of this may diverge a little from some of the leaders in this world, just because of who I am and who they are. But again, I'd like to suggest that just because you don't have conscious, independent free will doesn't mean you're not an important causal agent. Okay? And I'd like to suggest that if you really want to climb in there and take away all the angst, here's a simple way to do it. I'm suggesting you have control over doing your best, whatever that means. Just do your best.
Ganbate.
Ganbate, as they say in Japan. That means, given the resources, the restrictions, even the lack of free will you may have, do the best you can with that. And then watch what happens. Because you're the only one who knows what your best is. You will stop needing as much validation from someone else because you're not working against some external set of criteria. You're doing your best. That means you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to get it right the first time. That means that when you're finished doing your best, having done your best, let go. Because this is now a process, and tomorrow you can do your best again and maybe even be better. If you're doing your best, then as part of that process, you're going to realize, wow, everybody else is doing the best they can with the resources they have, including the utter lack of awareness that they don't have free will, including the fact that they have had a completely different life set of experiences that have shaped their neurology. If you really commit to doing your best and you realize everyone else is doing the best that they can, and no two of us have had the same experiences, you'll find yourself being far more compassionate. Because you just understand the only difference between me and this worst possible human scenario is luck. I happen to be raised the way I was raised. My neurochemistry, my biochemistry, my genetics, all of it, good, bad, indifferent, it's luck. So now I'm a far more compassionate human being. I'm getting quiet because, as you said, now we get to the first part of your question, is getting still volitional? Yes, the question is to what? I'm suggesting that as you continue to expand, or more accurately, allow your sense of self to expand, you're going to realize that your sense of self wasn't accurately representing who you are. It was a myopic, fearful, egoic constriction on who you really are. I'm suggesting that who you already are is deeply and profoundly still right now. It's trying to remind the rest of you to come back home. That's all. And every time we breathe, you're just coming back home. And you begin to realize, wow, okay, so maybe this whole complete still self is something my conscious mind isn't aware of yet. And the more I get still, the bigger that sense of self gets, the more I realize, wow, I'm actually grateful that that conscious, egoic self didn't have free will, because it would have made a real mess out of things. And I'd like to suggest that when you intend, you're intending to get still, you're intending to do anything, something very deep and very profound is taking place. And I'd like to suggest that if you get quiet enough, you can sense it. It's not an academic idea or a thought. I'm suggesting that when you intend, that nothing less than the entire universe itself, the universe in its utter entirety, its utter wholeness, is acting through you. It's doing what it does. And you'll feel that. And that utterly overwhelming reality may not be particularly satisfying to a myopic, constricted, terrified, egoic hominid fresh out of the trees who's busy thinking that they're somehow alone and separate, isolated from, independent of the universe, the rest of the universe. And somehow, through all that, somehow they're superior to everything else in that universe, and that universe is there as resources to be exploited by them. What I'm suggesting is, as that sense of self expands, you get more and more quiet, that very same overwhelming reality is not only satisfying, it's not only useful, it's liberating. It will set you free from a lifetime of potential suffering, including judging and condemning every one of your fellow human beings for not being exactly like you are. So, in this process of doing what you're doing, progressively more expansive, this practical spirituality. Be patient, because more and more who you really are, this whole universe acting, right? That's what's making the decisions.
Wow, thank you. So there are two directions I want to take this. Firstly, I think what is such an important aspect to this podcast is for people to see that somebody can be living a deeply spiritual life and be completely immersed in this culture and still be doing that. And so if you wouldn't mind, I would like to just give my take on what I'm hearing about sort of your philosophy, and please bend it in whatever way feels best.
I don't have any choice about it.
Yeah, I'm going to say it anyway.
I have no free will where this
No, you really don't. So I think, and I'll try and sort of drop in a couple of kind of epiphanies that I had as well while you were talking that helped me to make sense of things. But it seems as if what I'm getting from you is that doing your best is absolutely only obvious to yourself. You know it, and it's a feeling, and it's something that only you can be very truthful with. Sorry, I'll say that again. Only you can be very truthful with. And what you have done is set up your life where it's like every day I'm going to do my best. That means find my edge, and tomorrow that edge might be a little bit more distant. It should be if I've done my best. But having a sort of healthy paranoia in making sure that the best is done for your sake, but not for anybody else's.
Good for you.
And that is an overarching belief that you hold. When you hold that belief, it then weights your options differently.
Yes.
Because if I say it's sort of like going for a higher altitude, more of a strategy, and then coming back down into the tactics, the optionality of choice changes in terms of how alluring different options are.
Yes.
Because if you have a belief that I'm going to do my best for me, not my best just so that my boss sees that I'm doing well, but I'm cutting corners, it's like I'm ruthlessly doing my best for me and myself. Then from that, you're holding that belief. Then when it comes to, oh, it's part of my routine to get still. I've said that I'm going to get still. I'm going to do that to the best of my ability. I'm not going to cut corners. I'm going to get as still as possible. Let's run this technique stack rather than, just sit on my phone and you're probably not on Instagram. Actually, I know for a fact that you're not. But that series of beliefs have led to, although on paper it might seem selfish, that it's like, oh, you're doing your best just for you. It's actually selfless, because doing your best and putting stillness or some type of introspective, expansive practice on doing your best automatically includes everything around you. That compounds over time. You want to do that and continue to do that. And at that point, skip forwards a few decades, then you have a lot more access to this knowing that you're something larger and a part of something larger. And that helps you to firstly accept your own individuality, but also to accept others and other things, other whatever, in terms of that own individuality. So it gives you less of a constriction that they need to conform to your ideals.
Good for you.
And more of a duty as such to actually, I was this lucky to have been given this. I was also this lucky to have been given the gifts of persistence and the gifts of stamina. And so in order to best honor those gifts, what I need to do is become a proximate causal resource for this information, so that other people might have the ability to say like, oh, actually, I want to incorporate that in my belief template. Ganbate, do my best.
Yes.
I want to write that on a sticky note and put it on the back of my door.
Good. Good.
Stuff like that, so that then you've oriented your life to one of a depth of meaning, because it seems as if every action folds back into doing something for something larger, this integral aspect of the truth. We are a part of this more massive universe.
Yes.
And because of that, it gives you a pretty obvious moral template to follow, but you're not necessarily getting 100% A+ every day.
That's right.
It's constantly iterating, but in itself, it seems to be a pretty terse and succinct belief set that has left you with internal freedom, peace.
Yes, profound peace.
And really a sense of having done what you were put here to do. I put a lot of words in your mouth. Please let me know if that was off by any means. It's primarily to illustrate the example that people like this actually exist. And I think similarly to the free will thing, well, it's like, well, if I don't have free will, then I'll just do whatever the fuck I want.
Sure.
I also get that feeling where it's like, where are the role models that are actually acting in accordance?
Yeah.
And so I just kind of want to underscore those 2 points simultaneously, like, here's a role model and here's how you can act morally, because here's the philosophy or just the rule set that this role model is abiding by. So please help me to correct that wherever it needs to.
First, thank you. That's awful sweet of you to say. And second, so the process of behaving is almost what they call an emergent property of expanding your awareness, your consciousness. And part of doing your best is living your life as best you can, given the resources you have, the limitations and the advantages. But the reason that I put such a high value on stillness itself isn't the goal any more than any of the techniques that we've put together to help people achieve stillness in less than 30 years of just sitting there frustrated are the goal. The point of this thing is expansion of your sense of self. And as that sense of self expands, I'm just suggesting it's inevitable that you behave in a moral way. And by that, I don't mean some set of hardcore rules that are conditional on some cultural values. I'm saying that according to your definition, this golden rule thing, it just becomes inevitable because you wouldn't harm someone else any more than you'd harm yourself. They are yourself. You can sense that. I am also saying that you're doing your best. That doesn't mean you have to be some saint. Part of your best is, I dropped the ball today. I said something or did something that was in fact harmful. Now what's my best? I'm going to do my best to make amends for that. Try to make that better. But I've got what I call radical humility because I know it's not me doing it. So the best that I can do is the universe acting through me, helping me. We're working together. Remember from our control piece, cooperative control? We're working with these things we have no control over. We use sailing as our metaphor. So we don't have any control over the wind or the water, but we have control over our attitude about these things. And while you can parse that and say, yeah, but where does that attitude come from? A lot of it comes from practicing. Whatever you do, you get better at. Whatever you continue to practice, you'll eventually master. It will become a habit. And you won't have to think about it. And the more this sense of self expands, the less extrinsic morality, rules have to be imposed on you. That's classic Taoism. Except I didn't have to read Lao Tzu to get it. Nor does anybody else. There are people doing what I'm doing everywhere. They just don't make any noise. They don't stick out. And that's the challenge with doing something like this, what we're doing. I don't want to stick out. I don't want to set myself up as some kind of expert or good guy or saint or anything. But my job is to do the best I can to help make it better. And if you just keep doing your best, better tomorrow, and hope you don't do too much harm now, as you continue to practice stillness, trust me, it'll take care of itself. Because in order to have this limited, myopic, egoic experience, which is what the universe needs, it's part of the whole, you had to forget who you are in order to have that experience of being separate, of being apart from, of being afraid of your own demise, because when that happens, the whole thing ends. No, it doesn't. But in order to have that experience, who you really are had to forget and do an elegant job of forgetting. But even it can't be not compassionate enough to give you a little hint now and then. And that's what stillness is. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it really does. Thank you, Jim.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for being such a causal resource for expanding that sense of self.
Well, you too. You're making this possible by asking these questions, because you're not just asking questions. You're contributing to this ongoing discussion. So thank you.
I don't have a choice.
And thank you again for being a part of this too. Hope you'll continue to be an even more integral part of this.
So as always, thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode. Now, if you're looking to build a stillness practice yourself, we have a lot of free resources, audios that Jim's recorded, etc., and you can see those in our show notes below. Along with that, there are also online courses that you can roll in if you want to learn more from Jim. We also have Obsidian mind maps. You can see a couple of them popping up here on the screen. Now, these are really cool ways to look at the podcast information and really just get an overview of all of the podcast topics and deepen the information within yourself. And within them, there are more of Jim's recordings. There's also a lot of Jim's artwork. So if you're interested in any more still life stuff, you can find a bunch of links in the description below. Finally, I really hope that you're getting as much out of this as I have. This is why we started this whole thing in the first place, because the combination of Jim and the practice of stillness had really helped to transform our lives here at Still Life. We just wanted to make as much of that available to you. So hopefully you're getting a lot out of it, and please let us know if there's anything that you want to see more of in the future, or less of. Anyway, hope you have a lovely day. Bye-bye.